I don't know. I've just been through so much lately, and honestly, I feel so overwhelmed.
Girl, listen. God will never give you more than you can handle, okay?
What God wants is for everyone to be happy.
So basically, all roads lead to heaven. And when you think about it, that just makes life easier.
All right, listen, let me put it this way. I'm no saint, but I know I'm not as bad as some people.
If you're just checking us out, just seeing what this church is all about, you're here at a great time. We're at week 3 of a 4-part message series we've been doing in here called Urban Legends. And what we've been doing is we've been looking at 4 very common statements that you may hear about God, or you may have said at some time of your life, or something that you're like, wow, that's probably something that God would have said. But when you look into the Bible, you look at what the scripture says, actually it's not in there. Or maybe the phrase or the phrase isn't in there, but the principle may be in there. And so we're looking at some things that we're saying, these are urban legends that maybe we believe, we say, but maybe it's just not exactly the way that God intended it. In Proverbs chapter 14, the verse says this, or kind of our theme verse for this whole series. It says that there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. So these ways that we can think about, we say, wow, it seems like that should something that God should say. It seems like that should be in the Bible. But when you investigate it a little bit deeper, you realize these things actually aren't in there at all. And so we've been looking at the 4, what I think are some of the most common statements about God that really aren't in there. And week number 1, if you were with us, we talked about the statement that a lot of people will say that a lot of people believe, and that is, above all else, God just wants us to be happy. Like, that sounds so good. Like that should be in the Bible. It's like, wow, that should be there. But we talked about the fact that that's not in the Bible, and actually God delights in our happiness, but actually he cares more about our character and our holiness than our happiness. And then week 2, last week, we talked about another urban legend that God will never give you more than you can handle. Like, wow, God will never give you more than you can handle. But really the opposite is true, meaning that a lot of times God will give you more than you can handle, so you can't do it in your own strength, so you can depend on him and his strength through everything that you're going through. Next week, we're going to be talking about another really common culturally believed statement that is out there. And a lot of people believe that it is the statement that it doesn't matter what I believe, all roads go and lead to heaven. Well, if that's not in the Bible, God never said that either. And we're going to talk about that next week. But today we're going to talk about, I believe, another really big statement that a lot of people say. I've said this before, and a lot of people will say, and it's the statement that basically says this, that it doesn't matter what I do, only God can judge me. It doesn't matter what I do, only God can judge me. And there's a lot of truth to that statement. And you may hear that statement and think, wow, that statement sounds like it should be in the Bible. Like, that's not in the Bible. I mean, even Tupac said that one time. Like, are you sure that's not in the Bible? Like, really? And it's like, well, actually, that statement's not in the Bible, but the principle may be, and it can be an interesting thing that when we talk about only God can judge me. It's pretty interesting. My daughter, who's 7 years old, when she was about 4 or 5, she used to say the funniest thing to me that I always laugh at. She would say to me, like, I would tell her, like, hey, Ellie, like, go clean your room, eat your vegetables, stop riding the dog like a horse. I would say something to her. And she would look at me, and she'd put her hand up on her hip, and she'd give me that little, she'd give this little attitude, and she'd be like, you're not the boss of me, only God is. And I'm like, I'm like, man, what do I do with that? You know, as a dad, like pray for me. Like as a pastor, like just pray for your pastor. Like she's going to be a teenager one day. I don't know what to do with that. But it's interesting because I think that when we say only God can judge me, I think what we're really trying to say, personally, I believe this, is that we're really saying, you know, don't you judge me. Don't you look at my life. Don't think you're better than me. Who are you to tell me how to live my life? Like stay away from me. You stay in your lane. I'll stay in my lane. Don't you judge me. Don't you correct me. God knows my heart, and it doesn't matter what I do because my heart's good, and I can do whatever I want. And don't you correct me. Don't you try to get all up in my business. Where does this come from? Why do we think this sometimes in our life? And I think it comes from a lot of different scriptures, but one main one that Jesus was talking about, and he was preaching a sermon actually, and he was talking about the importance of knowing that he is the judge, that we're not the judge, that God is the judge. And he said this in Matthew chapter 7 in the very famous sermon called Sermon on the Mount, and it says this: Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured to you." And let me just be extremely clear this morning that when it comes to eternity, only God has the right to judge a soul. Like only God makes the call on that. Eternity will never be your call. It'll never be my call. Only God gets to make the call, the judgment call on whether somebody goes to heaven or not. Like a lot of times we want to make that call, but only God gets to make that call. If you create the heavens and the earth, if you create the universe, you send your son to die for the people of that planet, guess what? You get to make the call. And I don't think any of us did that. So God gets to make the call on those things. But here's the problem and here's the struggle. I think a lot of people struggle with their faith because maybe they went to church, maybe they were in a part of around some Jesus followers, maybe some Christians, and they were judged either accurately or inaccurately. And because they were judged, now they struggle with their faith. They're like, wow, that church is very judgy. They judge me. That person judges me all the time. And they stand away from their faith or from God because sometimes as Christians, we judge way too quickly. We can judge people way too quickly. We can get into somebody's business way too soon. And we can think we know what's going on and we can judge people. And let me just say, listen, if you have ever been somebody who feels like you have been judged either accurately or inaccurately by a Christian, let me just say, as a representation of church and of Jesus followers, listen, if that's you today, listen, I am so sorry. I apologize. Like that is never what God intended for you to experience. Like God does not want you to experience in church just this judgmentalism. God doesn't want you to experience that. So if you've ever encountered that, I'm so sorry. That's not what God wanted for you. But I want you to know something this morning, and that is that, listen, you're not alone though. You are not alone. By a show of hands today, let me just ask you across this place, if you've ever been judged either accurately or inaccurately by another Christian, would you raise your hand today and say that I've been judged before? Man, you got people all over the place. Now keep being honest. All right, keep being honest. Would you raise your hand today if you've ever judged somebody else maybe a little bit too soon and you judge them? So exactly, that's why we're talking about this today. Let me give you a few questions this morning to get our brains thinking, because I think this is an important thing to talk through. Let me ask you a question. Number one, do you think the Lord means we should never judge anyone for anything at any time? Like if you own a business, do you have the right to judge your employees? If you're a teacher, does a teacher have the right to judge the assignments that have been turned in from the students? Do you have the right to judge somebody who has committed a crime and are up, against something in a courtroom? Do we have the right to judge? Do you think the Lord means we should never judge anyone for anything at any time? Number two, let's get us thinking. Do you think we should never allow anyone to correct or judge us? Do you think we should never allow correction? We should never allow somebody to look in at our life and give us some correction. Last one, to get us thinking this morning. Do you think it could help you if you allowed somebody in your life, not to judge you, but to hear your heart when you're making some really big mistakes. Like when you're going through something, and maybe you've made some mistakes, and maybe you're going through some really hard season. Do you think it would help you if you were able to be completely vulnerable, lay your heart on the table and say, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm going through. Can you help me? Let me let you in on what I'm going through. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the dentist, and I got a great dentist. He actually comes to the church here, but I hate going to the dentist. Anybody in with me this morning? You hate going to the dentist? Come on, anybody? Man, I hate going to the dentist. I just hate going to the dentist. I don't know what it is. It's like whenever I go to the dentist, I feel like I resort back to 5-year-old Jason. Like I'm in that chair, and I feel like I'm in the principal's office, and I'm sitting there, and they ask me these questions, and I'm like, and I don't know about you, but I just feel compelled to lie when I'm in the dentist's office. Like they're like, have you been flossing? I'm like, yes, absolutely. I floss 5 times a day. I love flossing. Flossing's my favorite. There's a dance. I do the dance. I floss. I do it all. And they're like, okay, great. How about mouthwash? You do mouthwash? Yeah, absolutely. Mouthwash, I got it on tap in my bathroom. I love mouthwash. I got bubble gum and mint. What do you need? I got it. I can feel compelled to lie, but as soon as I open up my mouth and they start working in there, they know I'm lying. They know. And here's the deal. Do you think my dentist is judging me? Absolutely. He's like, man, he goes, this dude is lying. I can't believe I go to his church right now. Like, what in the world is happening? Like they know as soon as they see some things in my mouth, they know what the truth is. And what I found to be very helpful in my life and to be very uplifting in my life is when I allow somebody who loves me, who I trust, who maybe has a little bit more information than I do, maybe knows a little bit more than I do, when I allow that person to actually have a view into my life, have a voice into my life where they can say, hey, I'm seeing some things that you're not seeing, and I'm looking at some stuff, and I'm noticing some areas that you actually need to start working on a little bit better. You need to start brushing and flossing a little bit better in this area. I find myself so much better in life when I allow somebody to accurately and lovingly come in and look at my life and say, hey, Jason, here's some things I'm seeing that maybe you're not seeing. Here's some things that I think maybe you need help with that maybe you're not getting the help with. Do you have somebody in your life that you can just lay it all on the table with? Do you have somebody in your life where you could say, hey, here's what I'm going through? Do you have somebody in your life that can speak into you and say, hey, I'm seeing right now you're headed down a pathway, like you're going through some things, and I feel like you're not going in a good direction. Can I speak into your life right now? Do you have somebody in your life that you allow and that can speak into your life in those interesting moments of life that we're really, really struggling? It's somebody that can maybe make a judgment in a good way. I love what Jesus says in John chapter 7. He says this, he goes, listen, stop judging by mere appearances. He goes, stop looking at people and judging them by their clothes and their hairstyle and what they look like. Stop judging people based on what they have on the outside. And he says, but instead judge correctly. So he says, judge correctly in the situation. Make a good judgment call in that moment. Look at somebody's life and not judge them with our selfish motives and our sinful motives, but actually look at somebody and pour into their life a life-giving perspective that can actually help them and that can actually be received by them. I love it that Jesus says this. Do we have somebody like that we can be that open with? That you can be that honest with and say, here's where I'm at today. Here's what I'm feeling. This is what's going on in my marriage. This is what's going on in my finances. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling this. Do you have somebody in your life to do that? The problem is a lot of us, we don't want that person really. We struggle letting somebody in that close. It's you can get close, but I don't know about that close. It's we struggle with that a lot of times. We want to keep people at a good distance. Nobody really knows everything, and we want to keep people really at a healthy distance, we say. And well, why is that? Why do we think we don't need to let anybody in. If you're taking notes today, I'd love for you to write. I got 3 things today for you to write down and to hopefully help you. And number 1, why do we let people in? I think it's because we think we are really intuitive. Like we think we are really intuitive. We think we really know what's going on. We think we really have the idea of what we need, what's happening in our life. We think we know more than we do. I can walk into a room if I'm in a staff meeting with our church staff members. I can walk in and if somebody in our meeting is not really digging it, maybe going through a hard time, like I can see it, I can point it out. I'm intuitive. I can say, hey, what's going on? Are you doing all right? Like, you have something to say? Like, I can do that. I can walk into a room like this and I can see things that are happening in the room. And I go to other churches. My wife thinks I'm being judgy, but I'm like, no, I just see things. I don't know. Like, it's a gift. I don't know. I'm going to call it a gift. And I see things like, why is that sign there? Why is there no sign here? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? It doesn't make sense. And I can do that, but I realized I'm not as intuitive as I think I am. I think I know what's going on, but I'm not as intuitive as I think I really, really am. I mean, have you ever experienced this where maybe you are out to eat with some friends, maybe the coworkers, maybe somebody, and you're out to eat, maybe let's say a lunch meeting, and you're having a great time, you're at Cruisin' Mirror eating that bread. Come on, somebody, like that bread is from heaven, and it's just great. Heaven's gonna be full of gluten and bread, just so y'all know, it's gonna be great, but like you go to the bathroom and you realize, like all of a sudden you look in the mirror and like you got all these black like poppy seeds or something like in your teeth, and you're like, oh my goodness, like I've got all this stuff in my teeth, and I've been talking to this friend, I've been talking to this coworker, and they didn't say anything. Like, it's just so embarrassing. Like, I can't believe it. And you're in there doing this thing, and trying to get it all good. And it's like, why didn't somebody tell me that I got all these things in my teeth right now? And I was thinking about it. I was like, maybe it's because we haven't really allowed somebody that close to our life that can actually speak into us and say, hey, you got something there. You got something going on right there. You may want to go to the bathroom. Like, we don't. Maybe it's because we haven't gotten that honest with somebody to allow them to speak into our life to that degree. Maybe it's because we said we're just going through life, and here's the deal. We've all got blind spots. We've all got areas in our life that we don't see. There's things that we're going through, things that we're doing that we don't see. We're not as intuitive as we think we are. Look at how the Bible describes the early church. I think it's so cool. In Acts chapter 2, it says this. It says, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. It's really interesting because in the original language, the words every day means every day. It's really cool. It's amazing. It says they broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Well, of course he did, because these people, they were in real relationships. Like they were really doing life together. They weren't faking it. They weren't trying to put on a mask. Like when you are with people and doing life with people, like you can't lie that long. Eventually people get to see through those things, and you can't wear the mask that long because eventually people start to see, hey, what's really going on? Like eventually everything begins to come out, and all of a sudden you're in a real relationship where you're talking through real things and real issues. And it says, man, when it was that real, God was adding to their numbers daily. People who were coming in and seeing the genuine relationships that were being birthed in the early church. And they said, man, I want that. I need that in my life. And people were giving their life to God because of what he was doing in the early church. Listen, you don't have to go through life alone. You don't have to go through life alone where nobody knows anything and then you're guarded all the time. Listen, I love our church. Our church is full of people who are not perfect people, but people who love each other, want to be there for each other. That's why it's so important when you jump into the church, jump into a small group, jump in on the team, jump around some people, like just have some fun. And all of a sudden you'll start to connect with one or two individuals. And then all of a sudden you start to be able to talk to them and share with them and open up with them. And they'll be able to hold you accountable. And it's not in a judgmental way, but saying, hey, let me help you. Let's help each other, because this is how God intended for our life to be, in community with each other. but we are not as intuitive as we think we are. It's so interesting because in the second year of us, my wife and I starting the church in year 2, my father-in-law, her dad went through some really, really bad medical stuff. Like he was in the hospital for months and months. He was in a coma for like weeks and weeks. It was crazy. They didn't know if he was going to live or die. And it was a crazy thing. And my wife, who is very upbeat, very positive, always wants to, help people. As her dad was going through all of this stuff, like she just wasn't the same person. She was going through some things, and she was struggling through this whole season that her dad was in the hospital. And I just kept plowing through life. I just kept going. I'm like, all right, the church, we need to do this. We need to keep going. We need to keep moving. We need to keep going. And all the whole time, my wife is struggling. And I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, what's wrong with her? Like she's just not the same as she used to be. And I remember one night as we were getting ready to go to bed, and I said to my wife, I said, honey, are you okay? And she said, no, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And I said, well, what's wrong? What's going on? She goes, I'm worried about my dad. I don't know what's going to happen to him. I'm worried about my dad. And I said, is this why that you've been acting so different recently? Like, is this why you've been struggling? And she's like, yes. It's because I'm walking through a really tough situation right now, and I feel like I'm walking through it all alone. And I sat there and I realized that I had completely missed the grief. I had completely missed it. I was just plowing through life. Just everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be great. Keep going forward. Keep moving forward. And I missed months and months of my wife just sitting there grieving about what's going to happen with her dad. Like, I wish I would have opened up and talked to somebody. I wish I would have said, hey, would you pray for me? My marriage, we're going through something. I don't know what it is. Like, my wife is struggling with something. I don't know what it is. Maybe somebody would have said, hey, dummy, look, her dad's in the hospital. Like you need to be there for your wife right now. You need to stop plowing through life and so focused on what you want to do and be there for her. And I realized I'm not as intuitive as I think I am. I need people around me, friendships around me to speak into me, to help me in areas of my life where I'm just not seeing it. Listen, we're not as intuitive as we think we are. We think we know, but we really aren't. We need people. But number 2, why do people not want to let folks in? Why do we keep people at a distance? I think number 2 is that we're afraid of the risk. We're afraid of the risk. If you're taking notes, number 2, we're afraid of the risk. I feel like I'm always the ball and chain of what God wants to do in my life. Like, I'm always the one, like, I don't know. Like, it's kind of risky, God. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to move in that direction, God. Are you sure? Like I can be sometimes like a person that kind of sees the negative side of things, and I'll totally miss the positive things that could come out of that situation. I'm always kind of that person. And maybe you could be that way too when it comes to relationships and letting somebody that close to you. Like, what if somebody I let in, they actually turn on me? What if they reject me? What if I tell them my problems and then they judge me? Like what if? Like, it's really risky to let somebody that close to me. Are you sure? And I love this quote. And it says this: there are no big rewards without first taking big risks. I believe that. There's no big rewards. There's nothing that we're actually going to accomplish that's great without initially taking some big risks in our life. And relationships absolutely are risky. And some of us are so afraid of it, we just stay at a distance because it's just too risky, God. I don't think I can do that. I think it's so interesting what the Bible says when Jesus went to his hometown to visit some friends and family and to do some miracles. In Mark chapter 6, it says this: when Jesus got to his hometown, it says he could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. It doesn't say that he wouldn't do miracles there. It says that he couldn't do miracles there. Well, why couldn't he do miracles? He's Jesus. He's the Savior of the world. Well, a lot of the people of his hometown looked at him and said, aren't you just carpenter, Jesus? Like, aren't you Mary and Joseph's boy? Like, what are you doing here? Like, you're going to heal somebody? Get out of here. I remember when you were 5 years old running around here like crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Now you're the Messiah? Oh my goodness, I don't know about that, Jesus. Okay. And I think sometimes, honestly, in our life, we can all come to a place where we look at Jesus, but we lower the way we see him. We've been in church maybe for some of us a long time. You know a lot of the things that God's word says, but we can look at what the Bible says. We can look at what God's word says, and we can kind of just say, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if it'll really happen for me. I don't know if it's really able to do it for me. And so I kind of lower the way I see it, and I don't really accept it as what God says it is, and how God can help our life and change our life from the inside out. And sometimes we can have a perspective of Jesus that simply is like, I don't know if I want to walk that pathway, God, because I don't know if it's just a little bit too risky. I know you say that. I know you want me to do this, but I just don't think it's for me. I love it's interesting too, because one time Jesus was talking to his disciples. They were doing ministry all day, and he says, all right, boys, it's time to wrap up for the day. Let's get into the boat. We're at the Sea of Galilee. Let's go on to the other side. We're gonna take a little journey, a little boat trip. And I've been to Israel, so you can see one side of the Sea of Galilee from the other. Like it's big, but you can see the other side. And the disciples are like, all right, Jesus, let's go. And they all pile into the boat. And he goes, we're going to go to the other side. But then what happens is in Mark chapter 4, verse 37, it says, as they're going throughout this journey in this boat, it says a furious squall came up. And the waves broke over the boat, so they were nearly swamped. He's like, all of a sudden, like this storm came out of nowhere. And that can happen a lot of times in life where you're just going through life. You're going to work, you're waking up, everything's good. But a lot of times it's like either we're in a storm, we're coming out of a storm, or we're about to go into a storm. Like life can be that way sometimes. And as they're in the middle of the storm, the disciples, they completely forgot what Jesus promised, what he said. It says this in verse 38, it says, Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, teacher, don't you care if we drown? Like, Jesus, get up. Like, what are you doing right now? You're asleep. How can you sleep right now? And it's so interesting because they forgot what Jesus said. Jesus said, before they even got in the boat, hey, we're going to get to the other side. We're going to the other side. I'm pretty sure if you create the heavens and the earth, you know the weather patterns in Israel. Like, I'm pretty sure Jesus knew that a storm was coming. And he said, listen, I know a storm's coming, but we're still going to go to the other side. They forgot what he said. They forgot. And as they're in the boat, they're looking at him. I feel like they lowered the way they saw him. They didn't see him as Jesus, Messiah, Jesus healing the sick. Because afterwards it even says that they were like, oh my goodness, even the wind and the waves obey him. Who is this guy? Like they're freaking, like they didn't see him for who he was. But I think it's so interesting because I think a lot of us, and myself included, that when we go through some storms, we can say things to God kind of like the disciples said. They said, don't you even care? Don't you even care? Like sometimes we can be going through a storm in our marriage. Our marriage is falling apart. We can say, God, where are you? Don't you care? Our job could be on the line at work. Maybe we lost our job. And we're like, oh my goodness, God, don't you care what's happening right now? And maybe we're struggling in depression and emotions. And we're like, God, where are you? Like, I want to get through this and I can't. Like, where are you? Don't you even care? Like, I'm addicted to something right now. God, I'm trying to get over this addiction, but I can't. God, where are you? Don't you care? My kids are going crazy right now. God, I need some help. Don't you care? Like, we can get to a place where we can say to God, like, where are you? Don't you even care what's going on? And I feel like a lot of times God will say to you and to me, he says, yeah, I care. I love you with all my heart. There's nothing that separates me from the love that I have for you. Like you're my child. I love you. But listen, I've tried to surround you with people. I've tried to surround you with so many people in your life, and you've looked at it as just too risky. You've looked at it as, I don't want to go deep with people. I don't want to open up my heart to people. I don't want to let people in. And he says, listen, all throughout the Bible, it talks about how people gathered together. They sharpened each other. They They were there for each other. They prayed for each other. Even the book of James, Jesus' half-brother says, listen, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. I think Jesus says to us, like, man, I've tried to surround you with so many people to lift you up, to encourage you, to pray for you, to be there for you. I've surrounded you with people that they could be my hands and my feet in your life, and so you could experience the love and grace that I have for you. But you thought it was too risky. You thought it was too risky, and you just stood at a distance, and you never let anybody in. You never let anybody into what's really going on. And listen, when you let somebody in and you, like James says, confess everything, be completely vulnerable, he goes, that's when you're gonna find the healing that you're looking for. He goes, but you gotta get that close to people. And I think a lot of us, we're afraid of the risk. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if that's for me, Jesus. I know you said this, but I don't think I want that. I'll take some other option, Jesus. So I think a lot of times we think it's too risky, but number 3, why don't we let people in? I think it's this one too. I think it's a lot of times we end up glancing at the blessing but staring at the pain. Like we can glance at the blessing of relationships, but we're too busy really staring at the pain of our past. The pain of relationships. I think it's amazing that a lot of times we can walk through life and a lot of times we can hold so many grudges towards folks. We can be so mad at people. We can be so upset and so angry. It's like, for me, it's so funny because like whenever I'm out in the sun, like I have this problem with my white skin. Like I get sunburned like crazy. Like I'm the crazy guy in my neighborhood that's always outside working with a shirt off too. So sorry if you ever drive down my street, that's me. You'll be blinded by the whiteness. It's like, oh my goodness, like Jesus, help that guy over there. But like I always get sunburned and I'm like always hurting like the next couple days afterwards, and without people realizing it or knowing it, they always will come up to me and it seems like they always like slap me on the back. Hey Jason, hey pastor, how you doing? They're grabbing me on the shoulders and I'm like, oh my goodness, like get off of me right now, like it hurts, like sunburn. And it's like people are like, oh, sorry, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know that you were in pain. I didn't know that you were hurting. And I feel like a lot of times in life when people start to touch an area of our life that is really sensitive, we get to them like, oh my God, like, don't go there. Don't go there. Don't talk about that. No, don't judge me. Only God can judge me. No. And we're really sensitive on some areas in our life. And what I've found in my life is that any area that I am really sensitive on is an area that I have not allowed Jesus to come in and heal me yet. Like my sunburn hurts because I'm not healed yet. Like give me a few more days, it'll get better. But areas of my life that I'm so like sensitive on and reject correction and don't want somebody to talk to me about that, it's usually areas of my life that I have not allowed the Holy Spirit to come in and do a work inside of me. I love the disciple Peter. I think I like him, I identify with him a lot because he was a buffoon, I think, sometimes. And he always stuck his foot in his mouth. He always said he was a blurter, like how many blurters we have in the house. I'm like, he just blurted things all the time. Like that's me, I can identify with Peter. And I love it, one day Peter was talking to Jesus and he comes up to Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, how many times should we forgive somebody? 7 times? Like he was saying that to impress Jesus because Jewish law was you only had to forgive somebody 3 times. So Peter doubled it and added 1. So he's like, 7 times, Jesus? Like he was expecting Jesus to be like, wow, like that, wow, Peter, that's amazing. Like, oh, wow, 7 times. Oh my goodness. Like you're super spiritual, Peter. Like that's what he was expecting Jesus to say. And instead, Jesus looks at him and goes, no, actually it's 70 times 7. It's a lot. And Jesus wasn't talking about a number. He wasn't talking about 490. Because listen, if you know how many times you've forgiven, you actually haven't forgiven at all. And so he's not talking about a number, but he's talking about so much forgiveness that it goes beyond anything that you can reason with. And Peter still didn't get it. I love it. He's like, he's scratching his head. And Jesus says to Peter, he goes, all right, let me tell you a story. He goes, there's this guy who owed a king, let's say $12 million. way more than he could ever pay back. And he goes into the king's courtroom one day and he pleads with the king, have mercy on me. I can't pay you back. This debt is out of control. I can't do it. I can never pay you back. And he's pleading. He's on his knees groveling. And the king looks at this man and he says, I forgive you. I forgive you. I'm canceling your debt. You're forgiven. And the very next verse, it says this guy who just got forgiven of this huge debt sees another dude who owed him like $17. And he goes up to him and he's like, hey, give me my money. And he starts choking this guy. And back then, Roman law said you could choke somebody who owes you money. Who wants to bring that back into society today? Just playing. But he starts choking this guy. And he's like, give me my money. And when the king heard about this, let's just say it didn't really end well for the guy who was choking his friend. Listen, I believe with all my heart that when you experience the forgiveness that Jesus offers, when you experience that everything that you've done, every sin that you've ever committed, everything that you've ever encountered, when you lay that at the feet of Jesus and he says, I forgive you, give me your sin, I'm taking that from you. You don't have to carry around the baggage and the weight anymore. He says, when you experience that kind of forgiveness, a forgiveness that we could never pay, we could never be good enough to do that. He goes, listen, I want you to extend the same forgiveness to those around you who have a debt towards you, who have maybe hurt you, where we have unforgiveness towards. He goes, I want you to extend the same forgiveness to them. And I believe with all my heart that is what God is calling the church and Jesus followers to be. Not somebody who says, don't go there, it hurts, don't talk to me about that. But actually let Jesus to come in and heal the areas where we're hurt. Heal the areas where we're staring at the pain of our past and saying, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna let you in to heal. I'm gonna forgive those who have hurt me. I'm gonna forgive those who are really have hurt me bad, Jesus. And I'm gonna let you do something inside of me that I could never do on my own because I've encountered such great forgiveness. I'm gonna extend the same forgiveness to those around me. Let's be a church that forgives first and not just holds on to it. But why is this all important? Why is this all important? Why should we let people in? Like, why should we do that? Why should we get close to people? Like, what is the importance of all of this? Like, why do we do it? And I believe with all my heart, last thing, you can write this down. I believe it helps us all have a clean heart. When we let people in, it helps us have a clean heart. Listen, when I put my head on my pillow every night, I have a clean heart. And it's not because I'm holy. It's not because I'm spiritual. It's because I've got people in my life that I tell everything to. I tell everything to. I don't hide anything back any longer. I just say, hey, here's my stuff. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm going through. Here's where I'm at right now. And I tell people everything. I have spiritual fathers in my life that I'm able to share things with. I've got Pastor Scott Lelisher, who some of you met a couple weeks ago, who was here and spoke. I can call him up at any time and say, Pastor, here's what I'm going through. I've got another guy by the name of Pastor Greg Surratt. He's the president of our church planting organization. He's a spiritual father to me. I can call him at any time and say, Pastor Greg, I'm struggling. I'm going through something. Here's where I'm at right now. Can you pray for me? Can you do that? I have spiritual fathers, but I also have spiritual brothers, people that are like right on the same level of me that I call all the time, people that you don't know and may never know their names. But listen, I got people that I call and say, hey, I'm struggling. I got guys like Chris Ria, I got Justin Jenkins, I got Robbie Emery, I've got Kerry Robinson, Eric Raftery, people that you don't know these people, but they're folks that I can call at any moment and say, hey, would you pray for me? Would you pray for my marriage? Would you pray for this thing I'm going through? I'm feeling an attack from the enemy right now. Would you pray for me? I'm struggling in these areas. Would you hold me up in prayer? And I got guys right here in our church that I say, hey, I need some advice. I need some prayer right now. I've got guys like Jason Clipper, Ryan Shaner, Lauren Epler, folks that I can say, hey, I'm going through something. Would you pray for me? And listen, I have a clean heart because I'm able to have people that I love, people that I trust, that I can say, hey, hey, here's everything that I'm going through. Here's everything I'm struggling with. It's all on the table. Would you help? Would you look into my life and give me correction that I need correction? Would you look into my life and give me assessment where I need assessment? Would you pray for me? Would you be there for me? Because I can't do this life all on my own. It was interesting because about a year ago, my wife and I went down to South Carolina, and it was just a miracle that I think we were invited to about 50 selected pastors all across America, and we were able to come to this meeting. And it was just in a room full of pastors, and you know, everybody is really holy when you got a bunch of pastors in a room. And so we're sitting there talking, and Pastor Greg Surratt, who I mentioned earlier, he was leading the meeting. And he said, hey, I'm so glad you guys could come down and break away from your churches and busyness of life and to be here with us. He goes, but the reason why I called you down here today, he goes, is because I'm watching a lot of you, and I see how fast you're running through life. And I see how successful you are at stuff, and I see how much you're doing. And he goes, and I'll be honest with you. He goes, I feel like for some of you in the room, there's gonna be a crash coming. There's gonna be a crash. He goes, Jesus talks about that there's a guy who built his life, his house on a rock or on a sandy soil. He goes, and when the storms of life came, because storms come, storms are inevitable, they're gonna happen. He goes, the guy who built his house on the sand, all you heard was a crash because his house came crashing down, his life came crashing down. And he said, listen, I think some of you in this room, he says, listen, you're not ready for what's going on. You haven't let anybody in. You haven't talked to anybody about what you're struggling with. You haven't had anybody know what's really in your heart. And he goes, and you're headed for a crash. And let me just tell you, that room just broke out of people crying, people being just like vulnerable, people sharing things that you would never imagine. Pastors dealing with depression, pastors dealing with marital issues, pastors dealing with suicidal thoughts. I mean, you couldn't believe what was happening in this room. And then all of a sudden, what Jesus talks about, what God talks about in James chapter 5 happened. When people started to get open, people started to lay everything down. People started to be completely open, and God brought healing in the middle of this entire room of pastors. Let me just tell you guys this right now. I believe in a room this size full of people, I think some of us in this room, we're going pretty fast. We're going through life fast. We're doing some things, we're accomplishing some things, and we're not letting anybody really into our life. We don't let anybody really know what we're going through. We don't have anybody really knowing what our thoughts are and what we're feeling and where we're at and where we need help. And listen, if we continue on a pathway like that, listen, we're headed for a crash too. Because I believe with all my heart that God has created the church, not so you can have a place to come on a Sunday just to check off a religious encounter moment with God, but that you can surround yourself with people to help build your life, to build your house, to build the things that are going on in your life so you don't have to do it alone. Listen, this church, we ain't perfect. There's no way that there ain't no perfect church. If you are looking for a perfect church, you will never find a perfect church, because as soon as you showed up, it wasn't perfect no more. Like there's no church. As soon as people come to a church, it's just not perfect, because we all got issues. We all got stuff we're working through. And the great thing about it is I believe with all my heart that our church, City Light, listen, we're not perfect, but give us a shot. Give us a shot. Like, jump into all the things that God's doing here. Get into a small group. Jump on a team. Surround yourself with people. Let people in, and all of a sudden, you're going to see God do a work inside of you. He's going to heal things that are broken, and you'll begin to see true transformation the way that God intended for you to encounter it, because God is so good. He loves you, and you don't have to do this life alone. Let's stand up today as we close.